So F1 is back from its summer break and everyone should be feeling refreshed and ready to go. We start the second part of the season at Zandvoort and the Dutch Grand Prix, with Max Verstappen and Red Bull in dominant form going into the break. Will this race present any chance of a reset for the grids, or will it be a Dutch masterclass from Max? Some of our viewers think they know the answer to that already. I think I probably agree with them. To answer that and other questions, though, delighted to be joined by Alex Kalinauckas, our Grand Prix editor at Autosport, and also our colleague who we love to get on this show as often as we can, and what a great reason to have him on heading into this weekend, Ronald Vording. First of all, Alex, asking about your summer holidays, specifically just before the summer break. We spoke to you when you were at Pembrey, but you couldn't say why, and now we can finally talk about what had to be a dream assignment for any Grand Prix editor of Autosport magazine. What did we send you to go and do?
Oh, you're taking me back a good couple of months there, Martin. I was like,
Yeah.
what was I doing? But yeah, Pembrey, of course. It was basically making this magazine, well, what it turned out to be, which is the 60th anniversary of McLaren. We celebrated that with essentially a track test of some famous McLaren F1 cars. Although basically what we did was, in conjunction with McLaren, we said, look, we really want to see some of your cars in action. We want to hear from people behind the wheel. And they said, well, funnily enough, we're testing many of them throughout the course of the start of 2023 to get them ready for their big celebration that was happening at Goodwood. They're also going to take them to a show in America coming up in November. So basically they were like, look, we're doing it anyway. Come down, talk to our guys, talk to our mechanics who, you know, were working on those cars when Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost were driving them, and all throughout the eras. We spoke to the chap driving the Mika Hakkinen 99 McLaren is a guy called Rob Garofol. He's McLaren's sort of in-house what we call shakedown driver. Basically, they trust him not to break the cars that, you know, are from the period. They need to be treated pretty gently. So got to chat to him. He's obviously ecstatic with his lot in life. You know, being able to drive some of the most famous F1 cars in history is pretty sweet, really. So yeah, that's what we went and did. It was really cool. Yeah, I think the features that we've come up with came out well, came out nicely, and yeah, I mean, happy birthday to McLaren. You know, haven't really said it fully on the podcast yet. So 60 years, an illustrious history. You know, hopefully they'll be back at the front fighting in Formula One soon and adding to it.
Yeah, a fantastic piece of journalism and reporting on these incredible machines. Of course, some of those back in the V10 era built with all sorts of exotic unobtainiums in the engine, which they can't do these days because they were designed to last a race. And, you know, and some of the times they'd go testing. Fascinating bit in the article, one of them about how they just went testing for weeks on end and just churned through Mercedes engines. Of course, all changed now in Formula One. Components have to last a lot longer. And now we have a summer break because the season is so much longer as well to give people time off, you know, those reporting on it, but more importantly, those actually in the sport. Alex, how crucial is it for Formula One and those working around the sport to have this summer break if they can get one?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely critical just from the area of burnout for all staff. You know, it's you know, I think everybody tends to think of the high profile team members when it comes to Formula One, the driver, the team principal as well. They're all flying business class around the world. It's the people not doing that back in economy, the mechanics, you know, all the hospitality managers, things that make an F1 team, you know, areas, jobs that make the F1 teams run over a weekend. It's them that really need the break, but also the people back at the factory, because Formula One is night and day. Like, you know, talking to McLaren's chief operating officer Piers Thin at that Pembrey test, I said to him, you know, made a reference to the off season. He said, well, what off season? You know, it's constant. They're doing day shifts, night shifts. So it's really important to have these factory shutdowns just to help the staff cope with the ever long seasons. So yeah, I mean, it's so serious. There's even talk of, you know, enforcing a winter factory shutdown in the rules to help with things like that. And, you know, just as I look off to my laptop that's off to my left here, I'm getting replies from team staff members checking their emails this morning because per the rules, they have to have a couple of weeks off. So things that I sent a few weeks ago are finally getting answers, which is absolutely good. And yeah, and you know, teams also they're having to get creative with the way they care for their staff. And again, it's good that you brought up the Pembrey trip, because that was a big part of what was going on there, was that these cars that have been restored by McLaren's heritage team, well, actually McLaren have gone, hang on a minute, we've got this team that we're going to need because they're selling cars to customers, they're going to be repairing cars that are owned by the ownership group of McLaren and things like that. You know, we need to employ people to do that, so it helps that they've got people who worked on them back in the day, because they're going to know essentially how things all worked, how it all fitted in, or if they need to get new stuff made. But also, what they're saying is that they can also switch in any sort of mechanics or staff that want a bit of time away from F1, time away from all that travel, maybe wanting to start a family, just or thinking about big life changes or something. So what they do is they operate their heritage test team running, the TPC, which is, when they're allowed to test cars that are at least a couple of years old. They did Oscar Piastri a lot of running in that. This was the end of last year, early on in this year. Piastri was also doing that with Alpine when he was before the whole thing. That was what we would have been talking about this time a year ago, the Piastri contract saga. But yeah, basically they're saying we run these teams in all the ways that we can swap mechanics in not at the drop of the hat, but if they're required to, and that way they do it at the end of the cost cap periods, and it helps them, sort of manage things, manage their staff better, keep them happy, all while staying neatly within F1's financial rules.
Well, I'm glad you brought up about how the drivers travel, because over the summer break I was on YouTube, and the algorithm, that thing over here on this side of the screen that says stuff you might like to watch, somebody had stood at a very wet and windy airfield somewhere near Spa in Belgium and filmed all the drivers getting on their private jets heading away for their summer break. And it's interesting to see how they and their trainers all travel. Some of the teams had several team members getting on their private jets. It was a fascinating video. I just watched people getting on planes, but if you like Formula One, you'll watch a lot of content online. And I can confirm the AlphaTauri jet is quite a tiddler, but the jet heading off to Mexico, Perez, has quite a big one. Let's talk a little bit about this weekend. And now this is why we've got you on the podcast and on the video, Ronald, is we want some expert local knowledge. Those private jets are all going to be flying in. So maybe Perez gets on that giant jet that he flew off to Mexico to head back, or maybe he's been on his travels over the summer. We don't know what the drivers have been up to. I think a few of them have been partying in places like Ibiza, we think. But Ronald, I'm not sure if you know where the private jets are flying into anywhere near Zandvoort this weekend. Thank you for joining us. How excited are the local Dutch fans ahead of this weekend?
Yeah, quite a lot, but I've got to be honest, we almost got like 3 home races nowadays. Zandvoort is fully orange, but Spa is fully orange. Austria, Spielberg is fully orange, so we got something to choose from. But no, it's always great to go back to Zandvoort. If you look at the layout, it's still really old school. I have to admit, it's maybe not the best one in terms of overtaking and getting a really exciting Sunday afternoon, although the weather might always help us a little bit. But in terms of the layout and in terms of qualifying, it's a phenomenal track. It's fast flowing. It's got some elevation changes. It's got gravel close to the asphalt, so it really punish you if you make mistakes. It all makes up for some excitement on Saturday, I guess. And another reason to be excited is that we don't know for how many years Zandvoort will be on the calendar. Initially, they had a 3-year deal, a 3-year contract. They have an extension for 2 more years, so 2024 and 2025. But I had a chat to the Zandvoort CEO, Robert van Overdijk, back during winter testing in Bahrain. And he told me there's no guarantee that we will be on the F1 calendar after 2025 every single year. And it has nothing to do with Zandvoort, with the track, or with the organization. In fact, they are really, really happy about the job Zandvoort is doing in terms of entertainment and also sustainability. But it has more to do with the overall tactics of Formula One management. They want to go to South Africa. Maybe they want to expand even further in the US. And that means it will be tricky for a couple of European races. And therefore, one of the scenarios that's on the table is that there will be a rotation system with Spa and Zandvoort. I really hope both of them will stay, because Zandvoort is my home race. Spa is the best circuit in the world. But yeah, we don't know yet. So as long as both of them are on the calendar, we have to enjoy them.
Yeah, flashbacks to the old European Grand Prix, as we used to call it, as it would change venues. That picture over your shoulder, that looks like a pretty classic shot behind you that we can see.
Yeah, it is Zandvoort. It is the old circuit of Zandvoort. It has changed quite a bit since then. But this is a picture from 1976, if I'm correct. James Hunt won the race in his McLaren Ford. So yeah, we've got the bank corners now, and the overall layout is a bit different, but it's still, the DNA of the track is still there. I talked about grass and gravel next to the circuit, and it will really punish you, and it did punish you back in the days, and it still punishes you nowadays. So yeah, that's the standout element of Zandvoort for me.
And how are the Dutch fans feeling about just the sheer dominance of this year? There's times when I feel like some of the radio messages that we've heard between Max and the pit wall have almost been a little bit played up for the fans just because they're entertaining us. Like, they're not
Yeah.
really arguing. They might be bickering like a married couple, but it's not serious kind of arguing. I think that there's, they've got that bandwidth to do that. We've heard some radio where Max has been watching the back markers fight, being like, "Oh, it's a pretty good battle to watch." Like, I don't imagine his heart rate is much off his resting pace, but it's fascinating to watch this era of Formula One, this sheer dominance. I hope the Dutch fans are enjoying it and not just treating it as a foregone conclusion that he's always going to win.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I asked the same thing to Max. I asked him, like, do you prefer 2021, the battle you had with Lewis and with Mercedes, or do you prefer this? And he said, well, 2021 was cool, but you can't have that every single year, just not for myself, but also not for all the mechanics that Alex was talking about earlier. So he said, well, dominance is not boring for me. It's the best feeling you can have as a racing driver. So he is really enjoying it. I have to be honest. I think the Dutch fans, of course, they want to see Max win. But I think they prefer to see Max win after the battle we had in 2021. But I mean, it's exactly like you said. We have to admit that 2021 was a unique Formula One season. And we have always had dominant times in F1 with one team really dominating for a couple of years. And Red Bull and Max, they deserve all the credits. I mean, Adrian Newey has done a tremendous job with the ground effect cars. If you look at the underside of the floor, you can see why they are dominating. But it's not only the underside, because they've got a aerodynamic efficient car as well. You could see that in Spa. They are always quick on the straights, and they have even the margin to run a little bit more downforce to make a difference in the twisty sector 2. So that's another element of it. And third, I mean, Max individually, he's much more mature and much more complete now than what he was in, let's say, 2016, 2017. And you can also see it when he takes a grid penalty. He's so calm in the first lap, just stay out of trouble, no contact, and then he knows once the DRS is enabled, he will come through the field and win by, let's say, 20, 25 seconds. So, it's a complete package. It's Red Bull. It's not only the car, it's also Max, if you look at the difference between Max and Checo. So, we've got to enjoy, I guess, especially the Dutch fans got to enjoy this period. Yeah.
Now, Alex, let's talk a little bit about the stories that have been kicking around over the summer break. There has been some stuff, actually, that we've been reporting on plenty on autosport.com to keep us busy every day. What have you noticed that's caught your eye?
Yes, it's a really interesting time of year when it's nice that we can go on our holidays, but we've also got to remember we've got to feed the machine. We've got to keep people still interested, in their Formula One news throughout the sort of the quiet period. So what we tend to do, let's sort of the cliche, how the sausage is made, if you don't mind to have a very graphic description there. Basically, what we do is prioritise long form interviews in sort of the races ahead of the summer break. We do it as well at the end of the season, and then we can feed out the most interesting elements to our wonderful, knowledgeable audience. So, but yeah, I mean, I get the things that have stood out for me actually links back to what Ronald was saying about Red Bull's dominance. It's that they're one of their senior technical guys, Pierre Vache, saying, well, we're surprised it's taken so long that everybody's finally starting to realise why our DRS is so potent. And it's nothing to do with the DRS itself, like the system. It's just the fact that the Red Bull rear end is so stable. They can run a lower beam wing, a smaller beam wing, and then have a bigger rear wing at the top. And when it's open, suddenly the DRS it's shedding much more drag. So it's not when you sort of, if even I can explain it in such simple terms, Red Bull are going, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? But I mean, that is slightly disingenuous because obviously it's very hard to replicate the rear end stability that makes the Red Bull so good, or one of the areas where it makes it so good. It's not even just the rear end; it's just general ride stability. It's just incredible on that machine. So I thought that was quite interesting. That was an interview we did with Pierre ahead of the summer break. Also, Jonathan Noble spoke to Charles Leclerc. He says, if the chance is there to win a world championship with Ferrari, I'm pushing for that. I'm pushing for a new deal. That's sort of the suggestion. I think really that reflects his only options. Like, where else is he going to go? There's not an opening at Red Bull. There's not an opening at Mercedes. So that those are the sort of standout spoken, person says stories. But yeah, the only real bit of breaking news that we've had to sort of seek digest, I guess, over the summer break was Felipe Massa and his potential legal challenge to the 2008 world title outcome. The controversy of the Crashgate, the Singapore Grand Prix, took a legitimate step further. He's written to the FIA, to Formula One, just basically laying out what his claim is and what could possibly go on there. I think the chances of the 2008 world title being changed, or the outcome, the result, Lewis Hamilton being taken away from him, are vanishingly small, almost non-existent. But there are legitimate concerns based on things that former F1 boss Bernie Ecclestone has said. Like, Massa has a point with some of the things he's raising. So yeah, that'll definitely be one to keep an eye on. And yeah, it was interesting to see that Massa, it broke early on this year that he was thinking of doing that. He's obviously not been dissuaded. He's linked to F1 still. He regularly appears doing TV presenting work for them. He knows the CEO, Stefano Domenicali, very, very well. Went from his time as Ferrari boss, a Massa Ferrari driver. So yeah, things are still happening. That wasn't instantly dismissed. So yeah, one to keep an eye on moving forwards as well.
Yeah, I can't see him them changing the world championship 15 years later, but there might be some sort of claim that he can make in terms of, would someone who perhaps could have scored more, and another win in Formula One, does that mean that you get to charge a little bit more for your appearance fee or something? Over the years, how many millions of dollars might he have lost? I don't know how these things work, but there's perhaps a claim there. He would have been a very, very deserving world champion, drove fabulously that year. It was an intense time to watch Formula One, and absolutely would have been an amazing world champion, and totally deserved it as well. Let's talk a little bit about some of the updates, Ronald, if you could. When you are walking down the paddock and the pit lane, what will you be looking out for as they start to show their wares, as it were? Because the teams bringing in any updates have to tell us. In theory, they have to now tell the fans and the media what they're bringing. What will you be looking for?
I mean, as the Dutch edition, we are mainly focused on Max and Red Bull, of course. So I had a chat with Paul Monaghan earlier about if they will still bring some stuff. That's quite interesting because, there's no need to do it. And another interesting bit is that Max told us that the upgrades they brought in Hungary, they were already in the pipeline back in January. So that's basically how it works. And Paul Monaghan said we've got one more step coming for RB19. So that's already in the pipeline. It's coming later this year. And he said we can bring some extra stuff. But that's purely looking at 2024. If we want to validate some stuff, on track, then we can bring it. The funny bit was I talked about it in Hungary as well, and qualifying was so tight, and Lewis was on pole. So I asked him if the guys behind you will really close the gap, will you bring some stuff for 2024? Will you bring it forward? And he said we are ready to react, so they can bring some stuff forward. But then Max, he won the race by 33 seconds, if I'm correct. And then in Spa, he won by over 20 seconds again. And one of the talking points in the summer break is related to Spa, if I may elaborate on that. And it was brought up after the race by former F1 engineer Blake Hinsey. And then I started to look in the data and telemetry myself. And it's quite interesting that Red Bull, with both cars, they lifted through Rouge Radion. So that cost them around 0.6 a lap, because you've got Camel Straight coming up after Rouge Radion. So that's quite frightening for all the others, because it tells you that there's quite a bit more margin still in the RB19. You can speculate about the reason why. It's probably related to ride height and then not wanting to damage the skid blocks too much. And they had the margin, so why not take it? But that's quite a frightening thing for all the teams behind Red Bull to know going into the second half of the season.
Yeah, they will have all seen that, and that's unsurprising. Going into that weekend, there was very changeable weather, and when I was saying earlier, by the way, that Max Verstappen's heart rate probably doesn't change. I was I was being a little bit tongue in cheek or facetious with that comment, because the team, despite having a really dominant car, the team is still working. Everyone on that team working really hard to make sure that they win with those kind of margins. And Spa was an example of where perhaps on a Friday they just went maybe a little bit wrong with setup or looking at the weather, and so had to be a bit more conservative when they were racing and lifting off to that vertical compression when you go through exactly. that section of the track. And just being careful. So they're not. It's not like they're turning up and just sort of phoning it in, as it were. They're having to do the hard work. Alex, any news around Aston Martin and perhaps some upgrades that we can look out for?
Yeah, Aston will be the team to look out for, I think, this weekend, just based on what they were saying ahead of the summer break, which is quite interesting, really, because if we think back to Bahrain, Saudi, Australia, those early races, it was Aston Martin that looked the closest to bothering Red Bull. Weren't really bothering them, although definitely there was a win lost at Monaco for Fernando Alonso. But basically, Aston is sort of quite openly, being quite frank, and it's nice to hear that, admitting they got things wrong in their sort of development path direction. We think that a lot of that centres around the front wing and particular concerns that other teams and the FIA had as well. So it'd be very interesting to see if Aston brings any particular development in that area. But also the team is just saying, look, we're not giving up. We're not going to turn off development now for this current car, switch towards 2024. I mean, it's sort of a little bit of a misnomer, because everything, as Ronald was saying, you can bring stuff to a car for this year to work on next year's car. It's still the development. Like, it's all about learning. I mean, in a way, it's really interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, how every session is a test session now for these teams, because they can't go away and do outside testing. So they've got to understand how the car is performing in every single condition or every single track type, corner type. It's worth having the drivers' feedback on it, on every little element. So, the teams will still be doing that. But yeah, Aston basically saying, look, we've got something coming for Zandvoort, so we'll keep an eye out for that. But also, as well, for that team, just it's not stopping. It's going to be coming towards the end of the season. At least at this stage, they may change their minds on that. But yeah, Aston one to look out for this weekend, I think.
Interesting you talk about every session being a test session. We have a fantastic article online right now on the website all about the young drivers that have to go into the FP1 sessions. All the teams have to do it over the year, and looking at the races, a lot of them haven't done it yet or enough. And then you look at we've got 10 races left, but actually some of them are sprints, and actually some of them are street races, and you wouldn't let your driver not learn the Vega circuit, and so you start planning them all out. And yeah, these test sessions, these FP1, FP2 sessions, they're absolutely crucial, and a lot of the drivers will be giving up their seat as well to get those in. We think maybe Mexico and perhaps Abu Dhabi will see those young drivers in the cars. Look, let's talk about this weekend a little bit though, Ronald. How do you see the competitive order shaking out?
Quite interesting. I mean, Red Bull has such an all-round car; it doesn't matter too much for them which circuit they go to. But I mean, Zandvoort demands completely different things from a car than Spa. So the pecking order behind might change a little bit, and I'm quite interested to see, even with or without updates, what Aston Martin can do. Because if you look back in the data and telemetry from, let's say, Bahrain, for example, and you zoom into the slower corners, they were the only team to challenge Red Bull in those specific corners a little bit. And Zandvoort, it has quite a lot of fast corners still, but it's still a more high downforce circuit than Spa. So I'm quite interested to see what Aston Martin can do there, if they can, let's say, get out of the midfield a little bit. And looking further back, I'm quite interested to see what AlphaTauri can do, because they've had an interesting switch throughout the year. When we talked to still Nick de Vries, got to mention him, only one Dutch driver on the grid this weekend instead of two. But when we talked to Nick de Vries and Yuki Tsunoda back in Bahrain, they said, well, high-speed corners, straights have improved massively, but slow-speed corners are still our main weakness. But then, just before De Vries got dropped by Helmut Marko, we talked about the upcoming races before the summer break. And he said, well, I think the Hungaroring, so Hungary, a relatively high downforce track, might be our best bet to score points. So that kind of tells you that they've made a huge turnaround with their car. And therefore, I'm quite excited to see what they can do in Zandvoort. Not only the team as a whole, but also Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda. So Aston and AlphaTauri are two teams that I will definitely keep an eye out.
Yeah, we caught up with Nick de Vries in London at the Formula E event before the summer break, and I'm not sure it'll be too long before he's back in a competitive seat somewhere in a race car.
Yeah, I went to a demo event at the TT circuit in Aston during the summer break, and he was there. But he refused to talk to any media. So yeah, everyone was basically there for him to get a quote, but he didn't want to say anything. So he did his laps and just left afterwards. So yeah, I can understand it. I'm not sure if he is allowed to say anything, even because of his contract with Red Bull. But yeah, we'll see.
We'll wait and see where he races next. Alex, mentioning there just some circuits that are upcoming, I'd love to learn a little bit more about any events you think we could see some different teams doing well. We saw McLaren not really bringing a specific upgrade to Spa and saying, look, we know we're not going to bring this a circuit-specific package here. And yeah, McLaren did struggle there. There was a difficult weekend with the weather as well. But we've seen Williams at times, like a Silverstone and at times in Belgium, Williams had some really good pace, and they're saying, well, yeah, this particular way that we can switch on this car with this aero package, it suits certain circuits. So I'm keen to know any upcoming races in the second half of the season that you're looking out for, certain teams that could shine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be foolish to predict anything but a Red Bull victory at any of the upcoming tracks. But as you say, Martin, some of them do favour other packages. I think Williams have got to be looking at Monza and thinking, look, we've really got to be scoring points really with both cars here, because we know there's a bit of pressure on Logan Sargent, whether he keeps his seat for 2024, and it would be helpful for him to be able to providing a boost to their constructors championship total at Williams. I think as you say, Martin, if you look back to Silverstone, McLaren have got to be eyeing Suzuka and all the high-speed corners there with great interest. Suspect Monza, okay, it's a high-speed track, but actually the corners, a fair few of them are quite slow, and Lando Norris says the car's still not very happy there, so it's going to be tricky compromise weekend for McLaren, but it has got excellent pedigree at Monza, so yeah, even last year as well, so or thinking back to 2021. So yeah, those would be keeping an eye out for other teams. But as I said, look, it's Red Bull have got it. Something's got to go wrong for Red Bull if you want to see another team winning. And I think I'm sure we're going to come on to talk about this with Ronald in a moment. But if there's rain at Zandvoort, potentially that's the only real chance to catch Red Bull out. Look at Max Verstappen. I mean, he nearly crashed one of his best wins this year at Spa in the rain because he got caught out by the rain coming down at Eau Rouge. It just happens. He did remarkably well to save it. I also liked his explanation. I asked him about that incident. He said, well, with the downforce helps to save it, helps to have a save like that. But anyway, then you've got the street tracks. You've got Singapore, we've got Las Vegas returning. These, the walls being so close, the Singapore race is very, very long. That presents a potential threat. Equally, though, I still wouldn't predict anything other than a Red Bull win. Qatar comes back. We saw some tyre problems there in 2021. Do you remember that? Particularly, I think it was in qualifying. You had was it Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri? Things like the pressures on them basically will be worth looking at. So potentially that's a problem there. And you can extend that to Brazil because, of course, Red Bull's on this amazing run. It should have had a 100% winning record from just before the summer break in 2022 right the way through to now, but doesn't because of what happened at Brazil with George Russell winning. I mean, obviously there was the Verstappen and Hamilton collision was played a big part of that, but equally Red Bull was fairly open saying we got things wrong when it came to our tyre calculations. That's another sprint weekend again this year, and obviously you alluded to what happened in Spa, Martin, with Red Bull and having to be conservative. So yeah, Qatar also another sprint weekend. We've got one coming in Austin. Those are the biggest sort of hurdles for Red Bull when it comes to its quest. Well, I mean, I suppose they take it one race at a time, but they definitely want to be the team that wins every single race in a season. So those are the biggest challenges they face. It's just definitely hard to bet against them not doing it, if that makes sense.
Well, this time last year, we were writing articles about how Verstappen could go on to break all sorts of records in 2023. He did do. We were talking about how Piastri knew he was in long before Ricciardo knew he was out. And hey, fast forward 12 months and Ricciardo is back in, but in a different car. And we were talking about, of course, the fabulous race that we saw this time last year. Ronald, before you go, how's the weather looking for this weekend? Any tips for fans travelling there from all over, well, wherever people are watching this video?
Well, that's quite a funny thing. That's a funny element of Zandvoort as well, that it's 80-90% coming in by either public transport or by bike. So if you go on a bike, just take an umbrella with you, just to be sure. Because I looked at the weather forecast, and it's really difficult to predict the weather in Holland. It might change 100 or 150 times in the next couple of days. But looking at it now, there's a risk of rain for every single day. So not on the media day, Thursday, but there is a risk of rain on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So that might spice up things a little bit. Although our partner who predicts the weather for us says, well, it might come Sunday after the race, so I just hope it comes in 2-3 hours earlier and gives us a little bit of joy.
Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Ronald. It's always a reminder how much we love to get our colleagues from around our business on these shows, and how amazing it is to hear your contributions in English as well. I don't know, Alex, if you are secretly bilingual. I'm certainly not. And then when our colleagues come on in just absolutely perfectly in English, thank you so much. I've recently been in Spain for my holidays in the summer break, and I managed dos cervezas, por favor, and that's about it. And you see Formula One, whether it's Alonso just flicking from Italian, Spanish, English to the media, and even legends like yourself, Ronald, coming on and just absolutely perfectly explaining Formula One to our English-speaking viewers. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you think about this weekend's action. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's keep the conversation going. We read all of the feedback below. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet and you are new to us, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe and the bell icon so you never miss a show. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.